If the judgments of unbiased reason held by different thoughtful people were examined with the frankness of an uncorrupted advocate, an advocate who so weighted the grounds of the two disputed positions that he was able to imagine himself in the position of the two proponents, so as to be persuaded as strongly as possible of their respective views, and who only then decided to which side he wished to commit himself. If the judgments of unbiased reason were examined in this way, philosophers would disagree far less than they do. Unfeigned fairness in adopting as far as possible the opposite opinion would soon unite inquiring minds on a single path. Immanuel Kant. So far, I talked about Kant's architectonic method, which is meant to turn our cognitions, our pieces of knowledge, which otherwise would just be a chaotic aggregate, to turn them into a structured system. And this is how common knowledge is transformed into scientific knowledge. This is how a science is built. And this is mainly the job of the philosopher, insofar as he is wise, insofar as he is a lawgiver of reason, about which I talked in my lecture on what is wisdom. But if I talk about structuring our knowledge, I already assume that we have knowledge. The next three methods I want to discuss are about how to even arrive at knowledge, how to even find truth, and how to separate truth from error. And this, therefore, might be of more general interest to everyone. The next three methods, since they all serve the same purpose, finding truth, finding out if something is correct or not, are very closely connected. They are the skeptical method, the critical method, and the sympathetic or participating method. And they are so closely connected that Kant doesn't always neatly separate between them. In his writings, in his notes, in his lectures, there is some overlap. The terminology also isn't always completely clear or consistent, and one could argue, and would probably right to do so, that these three methods are not truly three different methods, but rather they are only one general method, which consists of three steps. Even so, I want to separate the method into its three steps to better explain what it is about. And the first of these steps, or the first of these three methods, is the skeptical method. Now, what the skeptical method is about to Kant is you should not immediately make your judgment. You should not immediately say that something is right or something is wrong. And when you hear something, when you hear some statement, some opinion, some argument, you should not immediately agree with it, and you should not immediately disagree with it. Rather, Kant says, you should reply non liquid. That means it is not clear, it is not enough, it is not sufficient, and you should suspend your judgment. However, it is important to note here what kind of suspension Kant means, because he says there are two different kinds. And here I will stress what skepticism actually means. Because nowadays we tend to equate being skeptical of something with doubting something. And if we go back, however, to the ancient Greek, where the word comes from, it doesn't exactly mean doubt. It rather means something like watching, looking out, serving. And therefore, Kant translates the skeptical method as the inquiring method, the method of inquiry, because he says you should suspend your judgment to then inquire further, so that eventually you can make a judgment, but a more informed judgment. And that is why the skeptical method has to be strictly separated from skepticism. Skepticism is a philosophical Denkungsart, what Kant calls it, that is thinking mode or mode of thinking, while the skeptical method is, well, a method. And method he translates with Denkart, that is think mode. Skepticism would be the position that truth is not possible. We can never know for sure if what we believe to know is right, if it is true, or if it is wrong and an illusion. That position Kant disagrees with, and that position, amongst other things, his critique of pure reason refuted. The skeptical method, therefore, Kant says, does suspend its judgment, just like skepticism is a suspension of judgment. But the skepticist suspends his judgment forever. This Kant calls the actual skeptical suspension. So he just says, we can't know, we can't decide what is the truth. And this Kant calls lazy. This is not what you should do. The skeptical method, on the other hand, is, despite the name, not based on skeptical suspension of judgment, but on what Kant calls critical suspension of judgment. And that is suspending your judgment only for a time to do more research, to look at the matter more closely, to inquire further, so that later on you can pass your judgment. One could compare the skeptical method, and Kant himself does that comparison, with how a judge in a criminal process is working or should be working. The judge should not immediately, when the suspect just walks in through the door, immediately cry out guilty or not guilty. Rather, the judge should take his time to, well, make his inquiry, to listen to both sides, to look at the evidence that points towards the suspect being guilty, but also to look at the evidence or the lack of evidence that points toward the suspect being innocent. And of course, the judge also should not be prejudiced. The judge should not be, for example, a racist who, when the subject is a black person or an immigrant or whatever, who immediately decides in his mind, yes, he must be guilty. But rather, the judge should suspend his judgment and be completely open to all sides, but not as a skepticist does, forever suspending his judgment. I mean, he will have to pronounce judgment eventually, but only so that he can further look into the matter, further gather information, and then hopefully make a better, a more correct, a more informed judgment. Kant is, of course, aware that this is not easy. He says that this is something that has to be learned, that takes time to learn, that is maybe easier in age than in youth. And he also calls this being able to suspend one's judgment the most prominent or the most eminent virtue of the philosopher. And indeed, I would say that this is not just specific to Kant. This is indeed an important quality and virtue of the philosopher in general. Kant himself says that he took example from ancient thinkers like Socrates and most importantly in this case like Pyrrho, who also were skeptical but not skepticists. So who were careful, and Kant applauds them for their carefulness. He applauds them for not immediately agreeing or disagreeing with something, for not being dogmatic and ideological, but rather for carefully asking questions and for being willing to say, well, this is not clear yet. Here I can't decide. Here I can't make a final judgment because I lack that knowledge. I only know that I know nothing, as Socrates said. But also thinkers that came after Kant also still displayed this virtue. It is, for example, very central to Husserl, who came about a century after Kant, and the phenomenology which he founded. Here it is central to practice what he would call epoche, which is Greek but basically means the same as the Latin suspension. So taking a step back, so to say, and preventing yourself, refraining yourself from judging. So when you look at a shop window in the streets and you see a human-like figure there, you don't have to immediately decide, is that a mannequin or is that an actual living human being? You can just observe and look at the mere phenomenon and what you are seeing there. That's where the name phenomenology comes from. And Husserl is a thinker that since has fallen out of fashion and is not as prominent as many other names in the history of philosophy. But even though he was very, very influential in the 20th century, and not just in philosophy, but beyond that, he influenced sociologists, students of religion, ethnologists, and so on. And even though he might not be that well known nowadays, one should not underestimate his influence. Often the people he influenced are now outshining him and better known than he is. So, for example, his most prominent, his most important student was Heidegger, who is more of a household name than Husserl is. The skeptical method of Kant's also reminds me of Nietzsche, who at some point defines objectivity as being able to have your pro and contra, your for and against, within yourself, or to hold them within yourself. So not immediately jumping at something and being for it or being against it, but holding back with that. That is what Nietzsche calls being objective. And once again, this virtue of the philosopher is hard for many people, because the unaufklärt people, they are far from being objective. They are far from being able to suspend their judgment. They are ruled by something else. That's what unaufklärtness is about. So they are ruled by their sensuality, by their own desires and self-interests, driving them towards one side or the other, or they are ruled by their ideology, by their belief, by what they have been taught, and therefore they lack that objectivity. Therefore they are often incapable of taking a step back and just looking and observing and inquiring. Kant also grants them that it is indeed in a way unnatural to do so, because he says our faculty of understanding, our intellect, wants to expand itself. We want to have more knowledge. We want to know what is the case and what isn't the case, and therefore we always want to make a judgment. We always want to say this is true and this is false. We have sort of a natural inclination against saying, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what is true and what is false. And this is, of course, why many debates don't work, because people, once again, especially if they are more unaufklärt, and especially if their self-interest plays into this, or if they are ideological in some way, people will immediately jump at something. They will, in many cases, not even be willing to listen to the other side, to give the other side and its arguments any thought and any consideration. Yes, in many cases, they even won't listen to the other side's arguments long enough to refute them. They will just dismiss them immediately. Like, I can't talk to a right-winger about Islam or immigration. He will probably just start throwing a fit and getting aggressive and screaming without being willing to look at it and to differentiate and put his judgment and his preconceived notions aside to arrive at a more nuanced judgment eventually. But likewise, I can't talk to a leftist about, I don't know, gender or transsexuality or whatever, or cultural appropriation. It's the same way. They already are set in their opinions, and either I completely agree with them, or if I disagree even on some minor point, I will probably immediately be called a racist and a bigot and whatnot, and they won't be willing to listen to my disagreement, to the arguments and reasons I may give for that disagreement, and they won't be willing to even consider the possibility that I could have a point and that maybe they should shift their opinion. And that is why a lot of our debates don't work, why instead they are so exhausting and so annoying. This brings me to a second important part of Kant's skeptical method. It is not just that you should suspend your judgment to do further inquiry before you make your judgment. Because, I mean, you could suspend your judgment to just find more reasons why you are right and why the other person and the other side is wrong. No, Kant says when you do your inquiry, you must be completely open to all sides, to all possibilities, and you should even support the other side. So you should try to make the other side's point as strong and as convincing as possible. You should even help the other side in a way. if not in words, then at least in your own mind, you should try to really understand the other side's position, and to not just understand what they are saying, but to understand their position better, if possible, than they themselves do, and to understand what they should be saying. And if they bring forth a bad argument, I mean, that doesn't necessarily disprove their case. You could be right, but still argue for the right thing in an unconvincing way. So if the other side presents a bad argument, like either the argument itself is bad and there could be better arguments, or the argument itself is not bad, but they are wording and explaining it in a bad way so that it can be misunderstood, then you should not just happily jump at the chance to defeat the other side, because it should not be about winning, it should be about finding the truth. And if the truth happens to be not on your side but on the other side, then you should come over to the other side eventually. So if the other side presents a bad argument, you yourself should come up with better arguments to strengthen their position. You should make the other side as strong as possible. So this is basically the opposite of strawmanning someone, right? When you strawman someone, you make him as weak as possible. You are not arguing against what he actually says, but against a gross misrepresentation and oversimplification of his point, just because that strawman is easier to defeat. Well, Kant would say he would also say that, just like the one who is doing the strawmanning, you should not necessarily argue with what the other person actually says, but instead of making it weaker, you should make it stronger. Because ultimately it's not about the other person, and it's not about you either. It's not about what your individual position is. It is about truth. And maybe the other person may not have the full truth either. Maybe he may not have fully thought through his own position, but then the arguments he presents should be an occasion for you to consider that position which he holds, and to maybe go deeper into it than he himself has done. And if maybe the other's words are not quite clear, if maybe there are several possible interpretations of what they might mean, Kant would say you should always go with the best possible interpretation. So with the one that makes his words make the most sense. You should not jump at an unclear or misleading statement and rejoice in the opportunity to make your opponent look like either an idiot or like he was evil. And unfortunately, nowadays, the opposite is usually done. That is why an aufklärt person will have little taste for politics and for public debate nowadays, because it is just so tiring, and it is so pathetic and disgraceful. I mean, here on YouTube alone, I get recommended so many videos by ideologues, by some right-wing propaganda channels, being in each video being angry about the next woke thing, that the next woke crime that Disney committed in a new movie or whatever, as if there were no more important problems. Sometimes, so even less so, I also get recommended some left-wing ideological channel, or I get recommended some apologists of this or that faith, or I get recommended some of these internet atheists, and it is always the same. It is always the other side is dumb and evil. Like, I can't count how often I've heard atheists bring out a certain verse in the Bible or in the Quran and then just go with the most stupid and most silly possible interpretation of that verse that makes the Bible or the Quran or whatever look the most bad. And I mean, of course, you can do that. It's easy to fight religion if all religion is to you is believing in a magical sky daddy who tells you that everyone who doesn't worship him in exactly the way you do, and everyone who follows another creed, and especially everyone who is gay, of course, must never forget that, will go to hell. If that is all that religion is to you, then of course every child should be able to refute religion. But the fact is that some of the greatest minds of humanity, people like Thomas Aquinas or Maimonides or even Zeno, or also Kant, of course, have been religious. And the fact is also that some of the best and most holy and most moral people, people like Martin Luther King, like Amadou Bamba, people like Ibn Arabi, people like Rumi, have been religious. So maybe if you do want to disagree with religion, if you do want to be an atheist, you should take it a little more seriously, and maybe you should not fight solely against and try to refute solely the most stupid and most childish and pathetic form of what is called religion, but maybe you should try to take up the more serious forms of it. And the same is, of course, true in politics. I mean, all these right-wing agitators, all they are doing is picking out the most extreme or the most stupid voices and then making fun of them or complaining about them. Or they are picking out voices that are not even extreme or stupid, but they are still twisting them to make them look like that. So, for example, when Greta Thunberg rose to prominence and Fridays for Future turned bigger and bigger, there was this book released by her and by her family about the climate and ecological crisis, and about how it affected the minds and the psyche of the people, and also about our modern society and how it is not sustainable, not just from an ecological perspective, but also from a social and psychological perspective, about how it creates mental illnesses like Greta Thunberg's own depression that she struggled with before starting her activism. And in that book, her mother writes about how she, that is not the mother, not Miss Ehrman, but Greta Thunberg, how she, from a very young age on, had been very focused on the climate issue and very single-minded. And her mother writes that her daughter sees these issues differently than other people. And then she writes, it is almost as if she can see all the carbon dioxide rising up from all the cars and planes and factories into the atmosphere. And I don't know about how it was in other countries, in other languages, but at least in German, for a while, you could not go into a comment section under a newspaper article online or under a video dealing with Fridays for Future or a video of a speech of Greta Thunberg, without dozens and hundreds of right-wing trolls making fun of Thunberg for allegedly claiming to have magical powers and being able to see the carbon in the air, and saying things like, you are all stupid following someone like that, and treating her like some prophet. This is the new Greta religion, and you are all stupid for following some child who claims she can see the carbon with her bare eyes. Of course, she or also her mother never actually claimed that. If you read the actual passage in the book, it's quite obvious that it isn't meant to be understood in a literal way. And you have to really read this passage with malice. You have to really misunderstand it on purpose to think that this is what she is claiming. And quite frankly, that just makes you look pathetic and disgraceful. I mean, sure, your own kind, the people of your own ideology, they will applaud you and they will repeat the same bullshit you are saying. But to all the thinking people, it's a disgrace that you sink so low and that you throw your own dignity away like that by making yourself so stupid out of ideology, because it is stupid to misunderstand such an easily understandable line like that, just so you have a point, just so you have a ground to attack. That's pathetic. But it is done constantly. And if you don't attack the other person for being stupid and for allegedly saying something completely ludicrous, then you are attacking the other person for allegedly being evil. Here in Germany, I could observe that very closely in the last over half a year or so, because since the 7th of October, pretty much anyone who didn't fall in line completely with the Israeli government and military has been accused of being an anti-Semite. Of course, Germany, due to its history, acts especially sensitive when it comes to anti-Semitism. But it has gotten to a point where the word has, and the accusation has lost all meaning, which quite frankly is on one hand ridiculous, but on the other hand very dangerous. And apparently it is not possible to have any concern for the people in Gaza and for the Palestinian people, or to have any solidarity with them at all. And it seems that when someone is showing solidarity with the Palestinians, that is not viewed as a legitimate concern that someone might have in the face of the death of thousands of human beings. And to be clear here, you could still disagree with someone. You could still say that their concern is misplaced, or that maybe it's not entirely misplaced, but maybe it is one-sided and they show too little concern for the Israeli side. You could say that, and then you could have a discussion about that. But when you are just immediately saying, this person is an anti-Semite, then you are disregarding their position completely. You are saying, no, they actually don't have an understandable or legitimate human concern for other human beings that are dying, but rather they are just racist. And this death of the Palestinians is really just an excuse for them to attack the Jews. And it has gone so far here that here in Berlin, in the last weeks, there have been students protesting at my old university, at the Freie Universität, and putting up a protest camp on campus. And the leadership of the university has called the police to remove the protesters and to remove the protest camp. And that resulted in a number of teachers at the university writing an open letter about how the students should have a right to protest and how the university should not immediately react with force and violence and with calling the police on them, but rather should try to first have an open dialogue with them and to take them seriously. And the reaction in the media was that these teachers signing that open letter, these professors, immediately got accused of being anti-Semites. Even though the letter had not even, unlike many people I've actually read it, had not even really dealt with the war in Gaza. And even though the professors had not really taken or expressed a position on whether they support one side or the other side or whatever, it had been specifically about the protesting students. And they had said in their letter specifically that no matter if you agree or disagree with the position of the students who show solidarity with the Palestinians, you should still respect their democratic right to protest, and you should still have a dialogue with them. And that alone is enough now to be accused of anti-Semitism. I wouldn't be surprised in the current state if what I said here in this video would result in me being accused of anti-Semitism by somebody. And what I'm saying here with Kant is we should not immediately assume that whatever the other person, the other side is saying is either completely stupid or completely evil. Rather, we should try to look at their side from a perspective that makes it look reasonable. We should try to think that maybe they have a point, or maybe even if they are wrong, and even if we do disagree with them in the end, whatever they are saying makes some sense, at least in their own minds. At least to them, it's probably not completely stupid or evil. I would say that I would call what is usually done hermeneutics of distrust. We are distrusting the other side, and therefore we are reading and hearing all of their statements out of that mistrust. And this is not just something that happens in public debates or in politics. I have been a victim of that, and as my channel grows and as my first book will come out soon, and then hopefully other books will soon follow, I only expect this to happen more and more often, because if my life has shown me one thing, it is this, that unaufklärt people can't listen and can't read. I've been accused of the most ridiculous things already. I remember one online debate where I had managed somehow to piss off someone by reminding him of his moral duties. And then in that debate, I ended up saying, well, if you had lived in the time of the Nazis, and if there had been a Jew coming to you, asking you for help, it would have been your moral duty to help, to, for example, hide that Jew somewhere in your basement or whatever. And the other guy was saying, yeah, well, that would have been the right thing to do, but I would have been too fearful to do that, probably. I wouldn't have dared risking that, probably. And what I said is, well, but then you are immoral. Because it is your moral duty to help this other person. And if you say that your own well-being, that your own life is more important to you than that other person, then that is exactly what immorality is. And to be clear, I did not accuse him of being pure evil and absolute scum that should be put down. I also didn't say that I couldn't understand his fear. I didn't say that it wasn't very much human to have this fear. I just said your moral duty is to not first and foremost fear for yourself, but to first and foremost do what's right, even if it comes with a risk. And this guy became completely unhinged, and he started accusing me that I was saying that he would have had sadistic pleasure at the poor Jew begging at his feet and trembling in fear for his life. And of course, I had never said that, and no one else who read my words came to the conclusion that I had said or implied any such thing. At another point, my lectures, What is Aufklärung? There's one lecture about the love for truth, and in the description I talk about how nowadays we like to look back at the age of Aufklärung and credit it for having laid the groundworks for our modern day idols like humanism or democracy. But I said that we don't actually look at what the Aufklärung was really about. And there some person accused me that how could I dare calling democracy or humanism an idol, and I must be totalitarian if I say something like that. Funnily enough, and ironically, that very reaction proved what I had said, proved that these are idols to us nowadays. And just like idols, just like some gods that you serve, they must not be criticized. They are holy cows that you must not touch. In fact, if you read my actual words, they don't allow any conclusions about whether I support or whether I disagree with democracy or humanism. I hadn't talked about democracy or humanism. I had talked about our relationship to them. Just because you are idolizing something and just because I criticize that idolatry doesn't mean that I criticize the thing which is idolized necessarily. I could still say that this thing has value, just that it should be treated differently and not as an idol which you blindly worship. Or one more example, maybe the most stupid and most funny one. I live in an area with lots of immigrants who would claim to be Muslim. And at some school where I was teaching, some 7th graders, so we are talking about, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, they found my channel and they found my introduction video, my channel trailer. And at the end of that video, I say that I can aufklär people and I can bring true felicity to people, but only if they are willing to truly listen to me and to truly let what I say influence them and to truly take it to heart and to truly believe in me and that I can bring them felicity. And at that point, I'm quoting the Bible and the Quran and pointing out how the Bible says that even when that even if the dead would rise, some people would still not believe. Some people would still not be convinced by that miracle. And then I conclude my video by saying that I have done miracles in the past. I have raised people from the dead already, and I can do it again, but only if you are willing to believe in it and to give me a chance to actually do that, not if you outright dismiss me. And they had managed to find that specific second in the video where I say that. I mean, the whole video is like an hour and a half long, and of course, these seventh graders didn't bother to watch the video. And then they reacted shocked or appalled or also with ridicule, thinking I was claiming that I can raise the dead. And I don't know, they then thought that I was a Satanist, a devil worshipper who goes to graveyards and digs up corpses to raise them again. And someone was saying that I must be possessed by some jinn. And once again, ironically, that only proved the very thing I had been saying in that video. That even when miracles happen before your eyes, even when something is very much clear and apparent, if you don't want to believe it, you will not believe it. You will misunderstand it, you will twist it around, you will turn it into something evil or ridiculous or whatever. And that is why you must not employ that hermeneutics of distrust, but rather you must always listen to someone with an open mind. You must always be willing to take seriously what is said and to consider that maybe it has a point, or otherwise you will end up making a fool out of yourself. Because to be sure, some of those students then thought they were making fun of me, but really they were making fun of themselves. I mean, they were the ones who were pathetic. Every person who really listens and who really understands what I was saying, even if they end up disagreeing, every person will understand that I didn't talk about being a necromancer. So in the end, all you are doing is making yourself look bad. Making yourself look to all the onlookers who look a bit more closely like a complete fool. And I just want to conclude this point by saying that this is a problem not just in debates, not just in matters of truth, scientific or philosophical truth, and not just in matters of politics or religion. But this is something you can, this hermeneutics of distrust, you can observe in daily life, in your relationships with family and friends and colleagues. And for that too, I could give many countless examples. So, for example, my uncle and my dad once exchanged emails, and my dad wrote to my uncle that he had known natural scientists. So my uncle was a teacher of physics, so he had studied physics, and my dad wrote to him that he had known natural scientists who were not so narrow-minded and arrogant and ignorant and dismissive of what is usually called humanities. And he was saying that in his own time of studying at university, he had been part of a lecture circle with students of philosophology, like himself, but also with students of physics. And they had read philosophical texts, and the students of physics had been very interested and very engaged. And the reply he got from my uncle was that it was terrible and disgusting in what arrogant tone he was looking down on students of physics. That is what my uncle got out of that letter. So the complete opposite, basically, of what my dad had written. Or I remember my aunt being terribly offended by me at some point when I said that my dad, who had studied at university, but I said that unlike his three siblings, so out of his siblings, two became teachers, one became a physician, and my dad was the only one out of the four who decided against a career, so to say, building on his academic studies. So, like me, he had studied German literature and language and philosophology, but then he went on to make a complete turn and become a physiotherapist. And my aunt said that I had offended and insulted her and her other two siblings, and that I had claimed that all academics were arrogant. And I mean, that is an interpretation that is not just wrong, it is also very unlikely that this is what I wanted to say, because even if he didn't go on that career, my dad is still an academic, and I'm also an academic, and so are most of my friends. So it is not the most likely interpretation that I would ever say that all academics are arrogant or idiots or whatever, because then I would be insulting my dad and myself and most of my friends too. And everyone listening can probably come up with more examples. Everyone can probably think of instances where others, or maybe also he himself against others, acted like that. Because there was a previous resentment, maybe for completely unrelated reasons, people would now listen to or read everything said with this preconceived distrust, and would understand each single word in the most insidious way it could be understood, instead of just looking openly what is said, and instead of assuming that the other person is not stupid or is not evil. And this is what Kant's skeptical method is about, not doing that. The skeptical method means critical suspension of one's judgment to further look into the matter, to further look what supports or what doesn't support a certain standpoint. And when looking into the matter, when doing our inquiry, we should make the other side as strong as possible. We should try to find the holes in our own position. We should try to find arguments supporting the other position, so that in the end we really can have a good overview of both sides, or all possible sides. I mean, in most cases there will be more than just two, and what may or may not speak for or against them, so that then we can make our judgment. And Kant would say that this skeptical method cannot or should not always be used equally or to the same degree. So you would say that in everyday life, prudence dictates that we are not always skeptical. I mean, every building I walk into could break down. Every food I eat, that I buy in the store, that I eat at a restaurant, could be poisoned somehow. But I can't always suspend my judgment and first do an inquiry before I decide to walk into the building or before I decide to eat that food. I have to go with what is most likely. And likewise, Kant would say that in morals, in mathematics, in natural science, we must not always suspend our judgment. But in metaphysics, he believed this to be very important, because here we have nothing to really base our judgments on. We have no experience pointing to one side or the other. All we have are rational speculative arguments, and you can come up with arguments for or against anything that may sound convincing, even if maybe they are still wrong. And so in metaphysics, he considered it tremendously important to employ this skeptical method. And I would even go so far as to say that him coming up with this method is the start of his critical turn. So in my lecture on Kant's life, I talked about how the 1770s were spent with him developing his critical system until in 1781 he finally published his Critique of Pure Reason. Well, even before the 70s, even in the 1760s, he starts coming up with this skeptical method and employing the skeptical method and writing that he believes this skeptical method to be the only path that is still open, that could still lead to turning metaphysics into a serious science. And therefore, I would say that him further developing and further employing this skeptical method throughout the 60s led to his critical turn at the end of that decade, and then to him really delving into coming up with his critical system during the 70s. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Kubilai Celik, Thomas Deuringer, Garnau Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Samit Özkilic, Christos Pai, Alexander Reuter, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring course.